Before I delve into my review of this film, I have to give a quick shout out to Mr. Michael Abels who scored it. As a soundtrack enthusiast myself, I can't not acknowledge that the music in this film was phenomenal and had a positive contribution. If you're watching this, you're probably one of the millions like myself who's seen Jordan Peele's Us this past weekend, and it should come as no surprise that this film was highly anticipated given the monstrous breakout that was Get Out. I believe Jordan Peele has begun making a niche for himself in which he creates films that are creative, yes, but are also good at making people think. And so I've seen quite a few film reviews this past weekend, but none of them really elaborated on the things that stood out to me whilst watching Us. And for that reason, I decided to add my own interpretation of this film amongst a plethora of commentaries that are already out there. Should you wish to skip around, here's a rough outline of the things I plan on touching on. The timestamps will also be linked down below to make it easier to navigate through the video. First and foremost, the casting of the film was great. Props to Jordan for providing opportunities for people of color who don't always see themselves represented in non-stereotypical or cliche roles. It's actually the casting itself that leads me to the first bit of criticism towards the film that I've seen, particularly regarding Winston Duke's character Gabe. I've seen people say that he was a bit of a punk and too non-aggressive when it came to defending his family, and I have to disagree with that assessment. Yes, in the film there were times when his commentary seemed misplaced, particularly when the family came face to face with Red's family, but I think Jordan intended for Winston, a guy fresh off his M'Baku image, to not be portrayed as this intimidating and obviously strong black man. It was a departure from the normal tough guy image, and I think that was a good thing. That aside, I believe the general consensus was that there were no acting holes, so to speak, in this film, and that goes for the few other characters we saw briefly outside of the family as well. Lupita in particular was phenomenal, but I don't think anyone expected otherwise given how impactful the promotional materials for this film was. All in all, the cast and their acting gets an A+ as far as I'm concerned. Delving into the plot now, I believe that the first act of this film was the strongest. I like the idea of starting it off with a flashback. It kicked the film off with the right amount of suspense. We then jumped to present day and were introduced to the characters in the scene very straightforwardly. Afterwards, it was pretty much confrontation time, which came faster than expected if I'm being honest, but I thoroughly enjoyed the 1v1 of the family with their doppelgangers. That was pretty fun. I liked how the doubles were better than the originals, like Pluto with the fire and Umbre with the running. Now, the first twist came as a huge surprise to my theater. They gasped when the twins' doppelgangers came out and the whole Tyler family proceeded to get murdered. Unfortunately, I noticed that tidbit in the trailer, so going into the film it didn't surprise me as much, but I still enjoyed it. From what I gathered, people had the most issues with the final act and the final twist, calling it quote-unquote predictable. I think that's a bit unfair. Considering we saw that confrontation in the trailer, we knew there was more to what happened in the mirror house that was let on, although sometimes, as we know, trailers lie. If you went into the film thinking the girls had switched at the start, then you probably had doubts, seeing how hard Adelaide was trying to defend her family and how violently she was killing the tethered. And if you went in thinking somehow Adelaide just escaped and was just traumatized from the encounter, then the odd noises she was making while she killed probably made you think the opposite. So I think either viewpoint you had going into the film, the movie did a good job of making you doubt it, so the final twist should have still been enjoyable. My personal problem with the final act was just the sheer scale of the doubles. It's like, how can you fix this? You just gotta throw the whole country away now or flee to Mexico like Adelaide said. The other thing that bothered me about the final act was I got the Hands Across America connection with the t-shirt and the tethered people's stance after they killed their originals, but my issue was I didn't think that they made this whole uprising just to make a statement for the news and other countries to see. I thought that once they were out, they would try to do something else. So, the debunking that I'm referencing here has to do with the theory that I've seen in almost every video regarding the son Jason having been switched as well. And to support this, people used the tunnel that he built while they were on the beach, his lack of speech / the odd way he spoke, the fact that he supposedly changed since last summer, and Adelaide's sadness at the tethered kids' demise. This is one theory that I'm personally not behind. It's not like I would be shocked if Jordan Peele later came out and said that it was true, but until he does, I think it's highly unlikely. Reason one being that when you see Red and how animalistic her dog Pluto, her son Pluto is, that's not something that can happen in a year, because most people are saying that if this switch happened, it would have had to have been the previous summer. and I don't think the tethered boy would have been able to learn this expansive vocabulary and adjust to normal life so quickly. And so for that reason,
for that reason alone,
and for that reason, I don't think the boys were switched. I can see why people would think that could be an interesting underlying theory. And like I said, if it's proven to be true, I would roll with it, but I think it's highly unlikely. Now that we've kind of skimmed over the plot and had a chance to talk about the twists, I also kind of want to delve into the Easter eggs and symbols because there was a lot in this film. So I won't reiterate what has probably been seen and heard by you guys a million times by now. And those would be the references to America / the US being us, the Michael Jackson Thriller t-shirt, and the Jeremiah 11:11 Bible verse. I do, however, want to talk about the rabbits. And I believe in an interview, Jordan Peele mentioned that rabbits and scissors are scary things, and he loves subverting and bringing out scariness and things that you normally wouldn't associate with the horror genre. And while I do think that's true to a large extent, whilst watching the film, that wasn't my take of it. I figured given the context that the tethered individuals are all living underground, and there's a lot of them because this was an American government experiment, and I'm assuming that there's thousands or millions of people down there, they'd need a food source capable of being available in an abundance and quickly. Given that it's a known fact that rabbits multiply exponentially, I thought it was a smart way to explain how they were able to survive that long down there without running out of food. I also like the subtle nod to rabbits in the shirt that Zora wore for the majority of the film. When I looked it up after coming home, I saw it meant rabbits in Vietnamese, something that a lot of people probably wouldn't have noticed unless they are Vietnamese or speak Vietnamese. Jumping into the themes of this film, I believe that Jordan has mentioned in interviews and on the press tour that one of the main takeaways of the film should be how we are our own worst enemies, and sometimes we think the threats are coming from elsewhere when really it's ourselves. And while I believe that's true and can gather that from having seen the film, that actually wasn't the first thing I personally took away from watching it. For me, my first theory on what one of the themes of this film was only exists with the presence of that twist that Adelaide and Red switched places when they were kids. I think the fact that Red, now Adelaide's, first course of action once she adjusted and was grown wasn't to go back for her forgotten tethered people, but it was to flourish on her own. She got married, had a family, and developed a relatively comfortable existence, and I think that can be parallel to people who make it out of their poor living conditions in the real world and never coming back and doing something for them. That could be a reach, but it's the first thing that came to mind for me after watching the film. And thinking back on it, I think there's an element of truth to it, because when Adelaide, now Red, confronted Red turned Adelaide in that underground facility, she said, "You could have taken me with you." The second theme that I also gathered from the film that I didn't really see as covered in other videos and reviews also does rely on that same twist. And it was how when you see Red, now Adelaide, has flourished when she was out of that miserable underground government facility, it can parallel what happens when you're given proper resources. For instance, in this country and many others, there's a disparity in wealth and resources, education, etc. And if everybody had access to the same stuff, a lot of people would be able to get further in life than they are. And to quote Red again, she said, "How lucky you were to live in the sun," or something along those lines. And I think that's a direct reference to how lucky you were to have what you had while we had nothing. The more I rewatch this film, I feel like my opinions are subject to change, and there's more that I'm probably likely to notice. There's a lot of little symbols and imagery that was included in this film that I didn't even touch on in this review. But for the sake of keeping this a reasonable length, that's about it. If you've made it to the end, congrats and thank you. I hope you all have a lovely morning, noon, or night, wherever you are, and thanks for watching.